My husband ditched me on my birthdayto, spend the whole day with hisex-wife. So, I unveiled his replacement at his mother's funeral. Can you imagine spending your 30th birthday, a milestone you've dreamed about for months, completely alone, while your husband spends the entire day playing hero to his manipulative ex-wife? And then, just when you think it can't get any worse, he has the audacity to call you selfish? I swear, if I hadn't gone through it, I wouldn't believe it myself. What happens next? Oh, it gets wild. It was my 30th birthday, a huge one for me, and I'd been talking about it for ages. My husband, Jerome, had promised me the world. Literally the whole day. He'd booked that fancy steakhouse I'd been dying to try, said he'd taken the day off, and that we'd do whatever I wanted from morning till night. I woke up feeling so excited, practically glowing, and even made a special breakfast while Jerome was in the shower. Everything felt perfect. Then his phone rang. My heart sank a little when I saw it was Natalie, his ex-wife. It was weird. Their divorce was 5 years ago, no kids involved, so why was she calling him at 8 a.m. on my birthday? Jerome answered, and I heard him say he'd be right there, that Natalie needed him. He came out of the bathroom, his face all serious. He said Natalie's father had a heart attack and she had no one else to call, so he had to be there for her. I swear my blood ran cold. I looked at him, disbelief etched on my face, and said, Jerome, her father has a heart attack twice a year whenever Natalie needs attention. You know this. But he just shook his head, insisted this time was different, real, serious. He promised he'd only be an hour, just drop her at the hospital, make sure she was okay. He said we'd still have our whole birthday celebration, just starting a little later. He kissed me on the forehead, and I watched him leave at 8 in the morning, wearing the clothes I'd bought him for our anniversary. I sat there in my birthday dress, a mix of hurt and disbelief swirling inside me. An hour passed, then 2, then 4. My phone buzzed. It was Jerome. He texted, saying Natalie was really upset and he couldn't leave her alone at the hospital. Her father was stable, apparently, but she needed emotional support. Emotional support? I called him, my voice tight, and that's when I heard it. Natalie laughing in the background, talking about something on TV. I snapped. Are you watching TV at the hospital, Jerome? He stumbled over his words, saying they'd gone back to Natalie's apartment to get her insurance papers. Right. The day stretched on, an agonizing parade of excuses. At 2 p.m., Natalie's dad was being discharged, needed a ride home. At 4 p.m., Natalie needed help setting up his medications. By 6 p.m., she was too upset to cook, so they were grabbing dinner. At 8 p.m., when our steakhouse reservation was long gone, he said Natalie had a panic attack and he couldn't leave her. I spent my entire 30th birthday completely, utterly alone, while my husband played caretaker to his ex-wife, who, let's be honest, was probably faking every single bit of it, just like she always did. Jerome finally came home at midnight. He found me sitting in the dark, still in my dress. He looked at me weary and started with the apologies, saying emergencies happen and I should understand. He tried to justify it, saying Natalie had no one else, and he'd promised to always be there as a friend when they divorced. But then he crossed the line. He actually told me I was being selfish, making someone else's family crisis about my birthday. And here's the kicker. He bought Natalie flowers from the hospital gift shop to cheer her up. I got nothing. Absolutely nothing. The next day, the truth hit me like a punch to the gut. Jerome's friend, bless his honest soul, told me Natalie's father never even went to the hospital. Heartburn. From too much pizza. Natalie had called Jerome, crying, anyway, knowing he'd drop everything. She'd pulled this stunt countless times before. Our anniversary, Valentine's Day, even Christmas morning. Always some emergency only Jerome could solve. And then there was Jerome's mother, Linda. She thought it was sweet that Jerome remained friends with Natalie. Linda had always preferred Natalie to me, constantly reminding everyone how pretty and successful Natalie was, especially compared to me. She'd invite Natalie to family dinners, seat her right next to Jerome, while I'd be relegated to the end of the table, feeling like an afterthought. She'd even show people Jerome and Natalie's wedding photos, sighing about happier times. It was a constant, stinging reminder of where I stood. That's when I reconnected with Nathan, my ex-boyfriend from before Jerome. Nathan was successful, handsome, and had always treated me like a queen. We started having coffee, just as friends, catching up. But Nathan remembered everything about me that Jerome had forgotten. My coffee order, my favorite flowers, my middle name. He listened when I talked instead of scrolling through his phone. And bonus, he was incredibly photogenic. 3 months later, Linda was diagnosed with terminal cancer. 6 weeks, they said. The family was devastated, and Jerome spent every day at the hospital. But even on her deathbed, Linda couldn't resist twisting the knife. Her last wish, she kept saying, was to see all her children happy. Then she'd ask Jerome if he regretted choosing me over Natalie. She'd hold Natalie's hand during visits, calling her the daughter she'd wished for. Every word was a fresh wound. The funeral was planned for a Saturday. Jerome gave a speech about what an amazing mother Linda had been. I sat in the front row, wearing a black dress, looking appropriately sad, but inside, I was a coiled spring of resentment. Halfway through the service, the church doors opened, and in walked Nathan. He was wearing an expensive suit, looking absolutely model perfect. He walked straight to me, sat down, and took my hand. Jerome noticed immediately. He stopped mid-speech, his eyes wide. Nathan whispered something in my ear, and I couldn't help but smile, just a little. Jerome stuttered through the rest of his eulogy, his eyes darting between me and Nathan, who was gently comforting me. The reception at Linda's house felt suffocating. Too many people. Crowded rooms smelling of old furniture and casserole. Jerome stood near the dining table, trying to shake hands, accept condolences from relatives I barely knew. His eulogy notes were still wadded up in his left hand, his right hand moving mechanically. I watched him glance at me every few seconds, then at Nathan, then back at me, like I was some complex puzzle he couldn't solve. Natalie, of course, was hovering at Jerome's elbow, touching his arm, whispering things I couldn't hear. She kept trying to position herself between Jerome and his view of me, but he kept subtly shifting to see around her. Nathan stood beside me, his hand resting lightly on my lower back. Several of Linda's friends kept looking at us, and then I heard it. One woman whispered to another, "What a handsome couple they make!" Jerome's face went white. He heard it too. Suddenly, Jerome's sister, appeared at my side and gestured toward the kitchen. I followed her, past the buzzing crowd, and she closed the door behind us. The kitchen still felt like Linda. Magnets on the fridge. Her grocery list stuck to the side in her handwriting. Na crossed her arms, her eyes fixed on me, reminding me so much of Jerome when he was trying to figure out if I was lying. Her voice was quiet, but sharp, like she already knew the answer. "Is Nathan your boyfriend?" she asked. I told her we'd been seeing each other for 3 months. Her eyebrows shot up. 3 months, she repeated, like she was doing mental math. "Yes," I said, my voice hardening. The same 3 months Jerome spent running to Natalie every time she called with some fake emergency. Na's face softened, and she looked down at the floor. She admitted she'd watched Linda seat Natalie next to Jerome at every family dinner for years. She'd heard Linda compare me to Natalie constantly, always making me sound like the worst choice. Her voice got softer. "I understand why you'd look for someone who appreciated you," she said. "It doesn't make what you did at the funeral right, but I understand it." The kitchen door burst open, and Jerome walked in, his face red, jaw tight. He looked at Na and told her to leave. She hesitated, squeezed my arm, and walked out. Jerome slammed the door shut, so hard the dishes in the cabinet rattled. "Who is Nathan?" he demanded, his voice low and angry, clearly trying not to yell with all the guests in the next room. I leaned against the counter, my own anger bubbling up. "Nathan," I said, is someone who remembers my coffee order. Jerome's face twisted in confusion. He also knows my middle name and my favorite flowers, I added, driving the knife in. Jerome exploded. That's not what I asked. How long has this been going on? Are you cheating on me? I've been seeing Nathan, I said, my voice ice cold, since my birthday. Jerome's mouth opened, ready to spew some excuse about Natalie needing help that day, but I cut him off. Her father never went to the hospital, Jerome. His big emergency was heartburn from too much pizza, just like I told you it would be. Jerome's face went from red to almost purple. He tried to argue. Natalie was in crisis. She needed support. I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. Natalie has been in crisis every Christmas, every Valentine's Day, and every anniversary for 5 years. He started to argue again, but his voice got quieter, like he was finally realizing something. I pushed past him, walking back into the living room. Nathan was chatting with some of Jerome's relatives near the fireplace, suit jacket unbuttoned, looking completely at ease, like he belonged there. An older woman, Linda's friend from church, was asking Nathan about his work. He explained he was in finance, and she made impressed noises. "You two make such a handsome couple," she gushed, looking at me with the kind of approval Linda had never shown. Jerome walked out of the kitchen and stopped dead when he heard her. Another relative asked Nathan how long we'd known each other. Nathan smiled. "Oh, we dated years ago, before she met Jerome. We just reconnected recently and picked up right where we left off." I felt Jerome's eyes burning into me from across the room. Nathan put his arm around my waist, and I leaned into him slightly. The gesture felt real, yes, but also a performance. I wanted Jerome to see exactly what he'd been missing while he played hero to his ex-wife. Suddenly, Natalie appeared, a loud, concerned voice cutting through the chatter. "Jerome, are you okay? You look so upset. I can take you home if you need to leave." Her hand went to his arm, her head tilted, that practiced look of worry on her face. Jerome pulled his arm away. "I need to talk to my wife," he said, his voice flat. Natalie's face showed actual surprise, like she couldn't believe Jerome was brushing her off. "I just wanted to help," she whimpered. "You've helped enough, Natalie," Jerome said, an edge in his voice I'd never heard him use with her before. Her eyes went wide, darting between Jerome and me, like she was desperately trying to understand what had changed. In that moment, I knew. He was finally seeing through her act, because he was too scared of losing me to fall for her manipulation any longer. Natalie stood there for a second, mouth agape, then turned and walked away, heading toward the kitchen. Several people had stopped talking, openly watching the exchange. The reception started winding down around 4 p.m. People collected their empty casserole dishes, offering final condolences to Jerome. Nathan and I stood near the door, and I could feel Jerome's gaze on us from the porch, his brother Stefano beside him, looking utterly confused by everything that had transpired. Nathan opened the passenger door of his car for me, and I slid into the leather seat, which still smelled new. He walked around to the driver's side, and before getting in, he leaned down and kissed my cheek. It was a soft, genuine gesture, but also deliberate. He knew Jerome was watching. I didn't look back at the house as Nathan started the car. I could feel Jerome's eyes following us down the street, past the parked cars and neighbors' houses. My hands were shaking slightly, clenched tight in my lap. Nathan drove me home and kissed me goodbye in the driveway. I walked into the house I shared with Jerome and immediately started pulling clothes from the closet. I found my suitcases in the garage and began filling them. Shoes, toiletries, the jewelry my grandmother left me, anything I'd need for a few weeks. I was folding a sweater when I heard Jerome's car in the driveway. The front door opened, his footsteps heavy down the hall. He appeared in the bedroom doorway, his eyes red and swollen from crying. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice cracking. "I'm packing," I told him, not looking up. He came into the room. "We need to talk about this. I know I messed up with your birthday, but we can fix it." I kept folding clothes, methodically placing them in the suitcase. "My name," he said, then again louder, "my name, my name." I finally looked at him. "This isn't about one birthday, Jerome," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor inside me. "It's about 5 years of coming second to Natalie. 5 years of your mother treating me like I wasn't good enough. 5 years of you calling me selfish whenever I asked for basic consideration." Jerome's face crumpled. "That's not fair," he yelled, his voice rising. "You're the one cheating. You're throwing away our marriage over one mistake. Natalie was just a friend who needed help, and you're making it into something it isn't." I pulled out my phone and opened the calendar app. For 2 years, I'd been keeping track. Every single time he canceled plans for Natalie, I shoved the screen in his face. Red highlighted dates. Christmas morning, 2022. Left before presents for Natalie's burst pipes. Valentine's Day, 2023. Missed dinner for Natalie's dead car. Our anniversary last year. Spent the afternoon helping Natalie move furniture. My birthday this year. At least 15 other dates, all marked in angry red. Jerome stared at the phone, his face draining of color. I didn't realize it was that many times," he whispered. "How could you not realize?" I asked, a bitter laugh escaping me. "When I told you every single time that Natalie was using you?" He sank onto the bed, burying his face in his hands, tears streaming down his face. "Maybe I let Natalie manipulate me too much, but I swear I never had feelings for her. I never cheated. What you did, bringing Nathan to my mother's funeral, that was worse." I laughed again, a sharper, more painful sound. "Emotional abandonment counts as betrayal, Jerome, even if it's not physical." He started crying harder. "My mother just died, and you humiliated me at her funeral in front of everyone." "Your mother," I retorted, my voice trembling with years of suppressed anger, "spent 5 years humiliating me at every family gathering while you said nothing. Remember her showing off your wedding photos with Natalie? Seating her next to you while I sat at the end? Calling Natalie the daughter she wished for?" Jerome whimpered. "She was difficult, but she was still my mother." "I understand that," I said, zipping my suitcase closed. "But you chose to let her treat me terribly, and you never once stood up for me." I told him I was staying with Sabina for a while. We needed space to figure out if this marriage could be saved. Jerome grabbed the suitcase handle, refusing to let go. "We can work through this. Just give me a chance. I'll do anything." I pulled, but his grip was tight. "Let go," I demanded. He shook his head. "I love you. I can't lose you." I yanked harder and it came free. He stood up, trying to block the doorway. I pushed past him and he grabbed my arm. "Don't touch me." I snapped and he instantly let go, his hand dropping to his side like he'd been burned. He followed me down the hall, still pleading. "I'll cut off contact with Natalie. I'll go to counseling. Whatever you need, I'll do it." I opened the front door, placed the suitcase in my car. Jerome stood on the porch, in the exact spot where he'd watched me leave with Nathan hours earlier. He was still pleading as I backed out of the driveway. In the rear-view mirror, I could see him, standing there alone, a desolate figure as I drove away. Sabina's apartment smelled like red wine and take-out Chinese food when I arrived with my suitcase. She opened the door in sweatpants, took one look at my face, and pulled me inside. I dropped the suitcase in her hallway and sank onto her couch while she poured 2 generous glasses of wine. She sat across from me, patiently waiting. I told her everything, starting with the funeral, Nathan sitting beside me, Jerome's face, the fight at home, the calendar, how Jerome had finally seen all those horrifying red dates and gone pale. Sabina listened, silent, until I finished. She took a long drink of wine. "Jerome," she declared, her voice firm, "absolutely deserved consequences for years of putting Natalie first. Any husband who abandons his wife on her 30th birthday for his ex deserves whatever he gets." Then she leaned forward, her expression serious. Bringing Nathan to the funeral was brutal, though. Calculated, public, designed to hurt Jerome in front of his entire family right after his mother died. I didn't deny it. She was right. It was supposed to hurt him, I said, my voice raw, as publicly as he'd hurt me privately all these years. Sabina nodded. Do you actually have feelings for Nathan, or was he just a weapon you were using against Jerome? I opened my mouth to answer and realized with a jolt that I didn't know. Everything with Nathan had been tangled up in my anger at Jerome from the start. Nathan remembered my coffee order, but was that love or just him being observant? Nathan listened when I talked, but was I drawn to him, or just to someone who wasn't Jerome? I sat there holding my wine glass and admitted, I can't separate my feelings for Nathan from my desperate need to prove Jerome wrong about me. Sabina had just said, that's something you need to figure out before you make any permanent decisions about your marriage. 2 days after the funeral, Nathan took me to dinner at an Italian place downtown. He wore a nice shirt, pulled out my chair, and asked how I was holding up after everything with Jerome. I told him I was staying at Sabina's, unsure of what came next. Nathan reached across the table, took my hand. I'll help you find your own apartment if you want, he said. You deserve better than a husband who treated you like an afterthought. The waiter brought our food. Nathan talked about his work, asked about mine, sweet and attentive as always. But as I watched him, I noticed something in his expression when he mentioned the funeral. He looked satisfied in a way that made me deeply uncomfortable. He said he was glad he could be there to support me, and that Jerome's face when he saw us together was priceless. He actually used that word, priceless, like he'd enjoyed being part of humiliating Jerome. I picked at my pasta, listening to Nathan talk about how Jerome never appreciated me, how he'd always known I deserved someone better. His words were kind, but his tone had this undeniable edge of competition, like he'd won something. I started wondering if Nathan had his own reasons for wanting to prove he was better than my husband. Maybe our whole reconnection was built more on competition and revenge than genuine connection. Maybe Nathan wanted to be with me partly because I was Jerome's wife, and taking me away from him meant he'd won. I finished dinner feeling strange and confused about whether anything with Nathan was real, or if we were both just using each other for the wrong reasons. Jerome called my phone 17 times over the next week. I blocked his number after the 5th call. But then he started texting from different numbers. The messages alternated between frantic apologies and furious accusations that I was destroying our marriage over his friendship with Natalie. 1 hour he'd be sorry, wanting to fix things. The next, he'd accuse me of throwing away 7 years over one bad birthday. He'd insist Natalie was just a friend who needed help, then pivot to claiming I was the one who cheated by bringing Nathan to his mother's funeral. I stopped reading them after a while. His brother, Stefano, called on Thursday evening. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. Stefano said Jerome was a mess, barely eating. He loved me, made a mistake, but everyone makes mistakes. He asked if I was really throwing away 7 years over one bad birthday. I told Stefano to look at the calendar I sent Jerome. I told him to count how many times his brother chose Natalie over me. Christmas morning, Valentine's Day, our anniversary, my birthday, 15 other red dates. Would you accept that treatment from your wife, Stefano? I asked, my voice deadly calm. Would you be okay with your wife abandoning you repeatedly for her ex-husband? Stefano went quiet. I didn't realize it was that many times, he admitted. Jerome didn't either, I said, because he never bothered to notice how often he chose Natalie until I showed him proof. Na called the next day with a different perspective. She'd been thinking about the funeral. She admitted she'd watched Jerome prioritize Natalie for years, always wondering why I put up with it. I asked why she never said anything. Na sighed. Our mother, Linda, actively encouraged Jerome to stay close to Natalie. She used to tell him that Natalie was the one who got away. Her voice dropped. Linda told Jerome He owed Natalie friendship after the divorce, even though the divorce was Natalie's choice. Na's voice got quieter still. Linda used to compare you unfavorably to Natalie constantly, not just at family dinners, but in private conversations with Jerome. She'd tell him Natalie was prettier, more successful. She'd suggest he made a mistake marrying you, that you weren't good enough for the family. Na said she felt guilty for never speaking up, for not defending me. Linda was their mother, and it felt disloyal to contradict her. I sat on Sabina's couch, listening to Na confirm what I'd always suspected. Linda never wanted Jerome to marry me. She'd spent 5 years trying to convince Jerome to go back to Natalie, and Jerome, unable to stand up to his mother, had let her destroy his marriage. 2 weeks after the funeral, my phone rang. It was Jerome's number. I'd unblocked it the day before, thinking blocking him felt childish. I answered. Jerome's voice was uncertain. Natalie called, he said, another emergency. Her car broke down, needs a ride to work. He paused, then, is it okay if I help her? I almost laughed. You're a grown man, Jerome, I said. You can make your own choices. But if you go running to Natalie again, then you're proving everything I said about your priorities. Jerome was quiet for a long moment. Then, I'll tell Natalie to call someone else. Okay, I said and hung up. An hour later, Jerome texted. I told Natalie to contact a tow truck company. She got angry, said I was abandoning her. I told her I couldn't keep helping with every emergency because it was damaging my marriage. I stared at the text. For the first time in our marriage, Jerome actually followed through. He didn't go rescue Natalie. I didn't respond, but I saved it. I met with a divorce attorney on Tuesday afternoon. Her office was downtown, tall building, gray carpets, diplomas. A woman in her 50s asking basic questions. Marriage length, kids, property. I answered. She took notes. She explained asset division, splitting the house, savings. Asked if I wanted divorce or separation first. I didn't know yet. She gave me paperwork. Walking out, everything felt more real, more final. I sat in my car in the parking garage and just cried. Even though Jerome had failed me repeatedly, ending a 7-year marriage felt like losing something incredibly important. We'd bought that house together. We'd talked about kids. We'd built a life, even if it was broken. Throwing it all away felt huge and scary, even though staying felt impossible. Nathan called that evening, asking how I was doing. I told him about the attorney meeting. Good, he said. You should file for divorce as soon as possible. You deserve better. Move in with me. We can start fresh. His eagerness, though, made me pull back. Nathan, I said, I need space to figure out what I want without pressure from you or Jerome. His voice changed, hardened. Are you seriously considering going back to Jerome after everything? He'll just go back to his old patterns. You're making a mistake if you give him another chance. I told him I needed to make my own choices, and that meant space from everyone. Fine, he said, but his tone wasn't fine at all. His face, when we hung up, showed such disappointment that it made me question his motives even more. Did Nathan actually care about me, or did he just want to win against Jerome? Jerome showed up at Sabina's apartment on Saturday morning. Sabina answered the door and told him I didn't want to see him. Jerome pleaded, Please, just give her something. Sabina came back inside, holding flowers and a letter. The flowers were my favorite kind, the kind Jerome always forgot. The letter was 3 pages, handwritten on notebook paper. I sat on Sabina's couch and read it. Jerome apologized for every time he chose Natalie over me. He listed specific incidents. Christmas morning, 2022. Valentine's Day, 2023. Our anniversary, my birthday. He wrote that he'd been blind, seeing each incident as an isolated emergency, dismissing my feelings. He admitted he let his mother disrespect me, never stood up for me. He was sorry for calling me selfish. The last page said he wanted a chance to prove he could change. He offered to cut off all contact with Natalie, to go to marriage counseling. He wrote that he loved me and didn't want to lose me. I folded the letter, put it in my purse. I told Sabina to tell Jerome I got it, but I wasn't making any promises. Actions, I said, mattered more than words after years of broken commitments. Luciano, a co-worker of Jerome's, called me on Monday afternoon. He said he needed to tell me something. Natalie had shown up at Jerome's workplace that morning, demanding to know why Jerome was abandoning her. She said she needed support after losing Linda, who'd been like a mother to her. She accused Jerome of being cruel, refusing her calls. Luciano said Jerome, right there in front of their colleagues, actually told Natalie their friendship was inappropriate and damaging his marriage. He said he needed to establish boundaries. Natalie cried, saying Jerome was choosing me over their friendship, like she didn't see the irony. Luciano said she left crying and Jerome looked shaken, but he didn't back down. I thanked Luciano, just sat there with that information. Jerome was finally setting boundaries with Natalie. He was seeing her manipulation clearly enough to stop it. I agreed to meet Jerome for coffee on Wednesday. We met at a place near Sabina's. Jerome looked tired, dark circles under his eyes. He ordered my coffee without asking. He'd finally remember my order. We sat at a corner table. Jerome pulled out his phone, showed me his blocked contacts list with Natalie's number. He showed me a text he sent her, telling her not to contact him anymore. He said he'd started individual therapy to understand why he let Natalie manipulate him. He said the therapist was helping him see how his mother's treatment of me was cruel, and how he enabled it by staying silent. Jerome seemed genuinely committed to change, truly. But I told him that even if his intentions were good, I didn't know if I could trust him again after years of feeling secondary in my own marriage. His eyes filled with tears. He understood, he said. He'd do whatever it took to earn my trust back, even if that took years. I finished my coffee and told him I needed more time. Jerome nodded. He'd wait as long as I needed. I met Nathan for lunch the next day at the restaurant where we'd had our first date years ago. He'd suggested the place, and I'd thought it was sweet, until I sat across from him and noticed how pleased he looked with himself. Nathan ordered for both of us without asking what I wanted, then launched into talking about apartments he'd found for me. Nathan, I interrupted, I need to slow down. I need to think about what I actually want, not just run from Jerome to you. His smile faded. He set down his fork. What's there to think about? He scoffed. Jerome spent 5 years treating you like garbage. I told him Jerome was finally making real changes, blocking Natalie going to therapy. Nathan's face went hard, a look I'd never seen before. You're making a huge mistake if you give Jerome another chance. People like Jerome never actually change. He'll be great for a few months, then fall right back into old patterns the first time Natalie calls crying. I told Nathan I appreciated his support, but I needed to figure out my marriage without pressure from anyone. Nathan laughed, but it wasn't a nice sound. I wasted 3 months being there for you, listening to you complain about Jerome, just so you could run back to him anyway. I stared at him. It hit me then. He'd never actually cared about what I wanted. He'd been waiting for me to leave Jerome and choose him, treating our entire reconnection like some kind of competition he was winning. I told Nathan we needed to stop seeing each other while I worked on my marriage. He called me stupid for trusting Jerome again, said I was just using him for attention when I was lonely. He stood up, threw money on the table, and walked out while other diners stared. I sat there, shaken. The man who'd seemed so understanding and supportive had turned mean the second I didn't do what he wanted. 3 months after Linda's funeral, Jerome and I walked into our first marriage counseling session together. The therapist was a woman in her 50s who told us to call her by her first name and made it clear she didn't do easy sessions where everyone felt good. She asked us each to explain why we were there. Jerome talked about wanting to save our marriage, how he'd finally seen his mistakes with Natalie. I talked about 5 years of feeling invisible, of Jerome prioritizing his ex-wife over me. The therapist listened intently. Then she said, her voice firm, "You've both made choices that damage this marriage, and you both need to own them." She looked at Jerome. "Your pattern with Natalie was emotional abandonment, even if you never cheated physically." She asked him point blank, "Why did you think your ex-wife's needs were more important than your actual wife's needs?" Jerome said he'd felt responsible for Natalie after the divorce because she didn't have family nearby. The therapist asked if he realized he'd been acting like Natalie's husband instead of mine. Jerome's face went red, and he admitted he'd never thought about it that way. Then she turned to me. Bringing Nathan to Linda's funeral was calculated public humiliation, designed for revenge, not resolution. She said I'd wanted to hurt Jerome as badly as he'd hurt me instead of actually trying to fix our problems. I tried to defend myself, but she cut me off. "We're both here to be honest about our choices." She asked if we actually wanted to rebuild our marriage, or if too much damage had been done. Jerome said he wanted to try. I said I didn't know yet, but I was willing to see if therapy could help. She gave us homework, identifying needs and boundaries. We left that first session feeling raw, exposed, but also like someone had finally made us face the truth about what we'd done to each other. Na called me 2 weeks into our counseling sessions. Natalie had contacted her, asking Na to tell Jerome she was having a crisis and needed him. Na said she'd told Natalie that Jerome was working on his marriage, and Natalie needed to respect his boundaries and find other people to lean on. Natalie had cried, saying Jerome was abandoning her when she needed him most. But Na stayed firm. She told Natalie their friendship had been inappropriate for years, and it needed to end. Na told me she felt proud of Jerome for finally standing up to Natalie's manipulation, after watching it happen since his divorce. She also apologized for staying silent all those years while Linda favored Natalie over me. Na said she'd been conflict avoidant, not wanting to upset their mother, but she should have defended me. She reiterated how Linda had actively encouraged Jerome to stay close to Natalie, always telling him Natalie was the one who got away. Na admitted the whole family had enabled Jerome's behavior, treating Natalie like she was still part of the family while making me feel like an outsider. I thanked Na for finally saying something and for blocking Natalie's attempts. Na said the family dynamics were shifting now that Linda was gone, and people were acknowledging how unhealthy some of her opinions had been. Jerome's brother, Stefano, was also starting to see how Jerome had neglected me for years. 6 months after Linda's funeral, Jerome and I moved back in together after living separately and doing intensive therapy. We weren't fixed, and probably never would be completely, but we were more honest now. Jerome hadn't had any contact with Natalie since that day at his workplace when he'd set boundaries. He actively worked to prioritize our marriage in ways he'd never done before, actually keeping plans, asking about my day, remembering details about my life. I still carried anger about the years I'd felt invisible, and the therapist said that was normal, something we'd work through over time instead of expecting it to disappear overnight. Our relationship felt different now because it was built on Jerome finally seeing me as his priority, and me learning to say what I needed before resentment built up to a breaking point. We started planning a small vow renewal ceremony just for the two of us. No family, no big event, just a private commitment that felt more real than our original wedding, where Linda had seated Natalie in the front row and spent the reception talking about how beautiful Natalie looked. Jerome suggested we write our own vows this time and actually mean them. I agreed, because I wanted promises based on who we actually were now, instead of who we'd pretended to be 7 years ago. So that's my story. It was a long, painful road, and honestly, sometimes I still wonder if I made the right choice. But I know I'm finally seen and heard. What do you think? After everything, would you have given Jerome another chance, or would you have walked away for good? Tell me in the comments below. I'm genuinely curious to hear your perspective.